There's an island here that you could walk across in about 20 minutes. It's low, flat. Half of it turns into a swamp when the river rises, and for most of the year it's frozen solid. Nobody lives on it, nothing grows on it that anyone would want. From up here it looks like a comma someone left in the middle of the water by accident. And yet, in the spring of 1969, men from two of the most powerful armies on Earth killed each other over this exact strip of mud. Not over oil under it, not over a city on it, over the island itself, over the line running through the water around it. I want to show you where that line is, because once you see it, the whole thing stops being a story about a river and starts being a story about how close the world came to something much bigger over a place that, on any normal map, wouldn't even have a name.
So let's get our bearings. This river is the Ussuri. On this bank, Russia. On that bank, China. And the island sits right here in between. The Russians called it Damansky, the Chinese call it Zhenbao, Treasure Island, which, given what it actually looks like, has always struck me as a grim little joke. Here's the thing that made this island a problem. When you draw a border along a river, you have to decide where in the river the line runs. One tradition says the border follows the middle of the river. Another, an older one, says it follows the main navigable channel, the deepest part. And look where the island falls. By the deep channel rule, it's basically on the Chinese side. By the middle of the river rule, it's on the Soviet side. The Soviet Union used the second rule, which meant that on Soviet maps, this island, sitting almost close enough to the Chinese bank to throw a stone across, was Soviet territory. For a while, that didn't matter much. Nobody really needed a frozen mudflat. But by the late 1960s, Moscow and Beijing weren't friends anymore. They'd been the two great communist powers, and they'd fallen out badly. And when two neighbors who used to be allies start hating each other, they stop being generous about lines on a map. What happened next didn't start with tanks. It started with men walking on ice. Through the winter, Chinese soldiers and Soviet border guards would come out onto the river and, essentially, shove each other. No shooting, just fists, rifle butts, shoulders, shouting across the snow. Each side trying to physically stand on the island and make the other side back off. If you've ever seen two crowds pushing at a fence, that's what a border dispute between nuclear powers looked like out here, on this ice. Right about here. And you can almost feel why it was allowed to stay at that level. Nobody wanted to be the one who fired first, because everyone understood what was standing behind those men on the ice. Then, on the 2nd of March 1969, it stopped being a shoving match. The details are still argued about, who moved first, who set it up, but the outcome isn't in doubt. Soviet border guards came out onto the island expecting another cold, stupid standoff. Instead, they walked into an ambush. Men who minutes earlier had been alive were lying on the snow of this island, around 30 of them in the first clash alone. And that's the moment the whole tone changed. This was no longer a quarrel about fishing rights or a comma in a river. Two countries, both with nuclear weapons, now had dead soldiers on the ground and a reason to answer.
2 weeks later, they came back for the real fight. On the 15th of March, it escalated into hours of open combat over this island, artillery, heavy weapons. The Soviets brought in something the Chinese hadn't faced before, a rocket system, the kind designed to saturate an entire area with fire at once. They didn't aim it at the island, they aimed it behind it, at the Chinese bank, at the positions and reserves waiting there. Think about the scale of that for a second. We're standing over a piece of land smaller than a lot of city parks, and both sides are now fighting as if the survival of everything depends on who ends up standing on it. And here is the part that I keep coming back to, sitting here looking at it from above. This is exactly the kind of small, almost meaningless incident that history is terrified of. Nobody plans a world war over a mudflat, but wars don't always begin with a plan. Sometimes they begin with 30 dead men on an island nobody cared about the week before, and 2 governments that can no longer be seen to back down. For a few weeks in 1969, serious people in Moscow and Beijing were quietly working out how far this could go, and one of the 2 capitals was thinking in terms of the ultimate weapon. Over the island you're looking at right now. And then it just stopped. Not with a treaty, not with anyone admitting they were wrong. It stopped because both sides looked over the edge of what came next and didn't like what they saw. The fighting died down, the island went quiet, and then it went back to being what it had always been, a low, empty strip of land in a cold river, slowly disappearing every spring and reappearing every autumn. For years afterward, it sat in a strange limbo, technically contested, practically untouchable, patrolled but not really lived on, a place people had died for that nobody could comfortably use. The strangest part of the whole story for me is the ending. Decades later, long after the shooting, the 2 countries sat down and actually settled the border here, calmly, on paper, the way it probably could have been done all along. And when they finished drawing the line, the island ended up on the Chinese side. So if you go looking for it on the map today, you won't find Damansky, you'll find Zhenbao. It's Chinese now. The men who died holding it were holding something that, in the end, was handed over with a signature.
I think that's why this place stays with me. There's nothing to see here, no monument you can pick out from orbit, no crater, no ruins. Just an ordinary island that for a moment in 1969 sat at the exact point where a border dispute could have become something the whole planet would remember. From up here it looks like nothing, and maybe that's the real lesson of it, that the places history nearly turns on almost never look the part. I've put the coordinates in the description so you can drop down onto it yourself and just sit with it for a minute. See if it looks as empty to you as it does to me, knowing what happened on it. And if there's a place like this you think I should look at next, somewhere ordinary with a story hiding under it, leave it in the comments. I read them, and the good ones I go digging into.